Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. Today I have a fun one for you. It's all about making DIY Christmas thank you cards. And this is a card set, so I'm going to share some tips and tricks with you on how I like to make my card sets go a little bit smoother and a little bit faster. All the supplies I'm using, as always, are all listed down in the description box below. I will be using some Cracker Box and Susie stamps, and I'm starting off by stamping on an A2 card-sized panel. So this isn't a card base, it's just a panel, and it measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This is heavyweight white cardstock. Now, tip number one, if you have a stamp positioner, use it. It's going to make your life so much easier. And watch how easy this background is to stamp with my stamp positioner. So I've laid out my panel in my MISTI. And I have the creative corners down there on the bottom right hand side so I can stamp off the edges of my panel. That's another thing with the MISTI. I love the creative corners. I get so much use out of those little corners that bump up the cardstock away from the edges. I've lined up the holly stamp and stamped it one time on my paper. Then all I'm going to do is flip my paper around, rotate it, and then stamp it again in the opposite corner. So now I have two stamps. I didn't have to clean my stamp at all. I didn't have to move my stamp. All I had to do was flip my paper around, and it works beautifully doing it this way. So once I have those two stamped, I'm going to go ahead and clean off my stamp, reposition it on my paper, and then once again stamp it down. I'm doing a double stamp here. That's another great feature of your stamp positioner. If you miss stamp once, it's fine. You don't need to line up or do anything special. Just ink it up again and stamp it down. It's going to stamp in the exact same spot with your stamp positioner. So I flipped my paper around, stamped it again on the opposite side, and now I'm going to repeat that process in the opposite corner that I did the first time. Again, stamping it once and then flipping my paper and stamping it in the opposite corner. Now all I need to do is fill in the center. And I did switch my stamp out here. I repositioned it. However, because everything's so symmetrical doing it this way, I really didn't need to. I could have just switched my paper, flipped it around again, and it would have stamped perfectly. I don't know why I took it off and stamped it. I guess I wanted to make it harder on myself. This card set came together super easy, so if this is my one mistake, I'll take it. Now, whenever I make card sets, if I make a background like this, I want to get more than one card out of it. So what I like to do is stamp a full panel, and then I like to chop it in half. Today I'm doing a straight line, but you can do angled lines. It really is up to you. You could cut this into 3 pieces and get 3 cards out of it. I'm going to do 2 today, and like I said, just chop it right in half and have 2 cards from one panel. That is a great way to stretch out your time so you're only creating one thing but getting 2 projects out of it. Another great thing to use on very simple card sets is large sentiments. I like to have a selection of large sentiments. This thank you from Cracker Box and Susie Stamps is called Thank You Big, which is the perfect name for it. It's just a really big thank you sentiment, and it fills up the top of my card, so I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to do any stenciling. I don't need to add anything else to it. The sentiment is enough. I'm stamping this down with some VersaFine Clear ink in Pinecone, which is the nice brown ink. And again, I am using my MISTI for this because all I needed to do was insert my card base in. I like to keep it nice and flat. And then I'll go ahead, once I've stamped it on one card base and lined it up, it's going to be perfect on the rest of them because everything is the same in this card set. So all I need to do, no matter how many cards I'm stamping, is just switch out my card base in there and keep stamping those sentiments one right after the other. And it just works out so well. Again, if you miss stamp at all, no big deal. Just stamp it again and you're good to go. There is no waste or very, very, very little waste when you're using your stamp positioner. That would be my #1 tip when making card sets. Invest in a stamp positioner. Now, something else to think about when you're making your card sets is dry time, whether it be embellishments, whether it be adhesive. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and use tape adhesive. But again, if you're making a ton of these, it might not be the most economical decision. It's going to be up to you. If you want to wait for the dry time of a liquid adhesive, and not spend as much money, go that route. However, if you're just making a few and you want to save a little bit of time with the dry time, go with a dry adhesive. I'm using the 1/8 of an inch tape from scrapbook.com. This works out really well. And all I'm doing here is adding a strip of craft cardstock behind. That is just going to break up all the white on this card from this little background and then my sentiment as well, the card base. So it just gives a little break to all the white, which is another little tip. Throw in a little bit of color, break up those white spaces, and then your cards don't look so plain. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish putting these together. All I need to do now is mount this panel onto my card base. I'm using foam adhesive. If you are going to be mailing a lot of these, maybe you don't want to go the dimensional route. One layer really isn't a lot, and it doesn't affect mailing for me, but if you're scared of it, just go ahead and glue this straight onto the card base. Because you're breaking up that white space with the craft, it's okay to glue it straight down. Then you're going to have a nice flat card. You only need one stamp and it's going to mail perfectly. If you're okay with the dimension, it does add just a little bit something extra to these very simple cards. Now, the final thing I want to talk about when making card sets is adding that final extra touch, the embellishments. When I make card sets or very quick cards, I like to take into account the dry time of not only that adhesive, but of any embellishments I put on. So Nuvo drops are out of the question. So are liquid pearls and all of those great things that I love adding to my cards. Even jewels and things like that, sequins, they have adhesive underneath them. And unless you're using sticky dots to put those on, which I find don't hold for me very well, if they do for you, great. They don't for me. But it takes too long. I have to lay them all out. I don't have the space to lay out all those cards to dry. So I like to take into account the dry time of any embellishments I put on. For both of these cards, I'm going to do a little something different. This first one, I'm using acrylic paint, which dries very, very fast. And all I'm doing is using a dotting tool, which you use in nail art, but I love to use it in my card making, and adding little dots over those berries from the stamp. This is a great way to add a little pop of color. The acrylic paint dries very quickly, so I can move on to the next one and not worry about the paint smearing on this. It's a super easy little technique to do. Now, again, this is paint, so it does require that little bit of dry time, but it's nothing drastic, not 30, 40 minutes. It dries in about 5 minutes, so I can quickly move on and stack these up. But if you are looking for an embellishment that is nice and flat, does not require any dry time, it still adds some color and some shine to your card, go with a Sharpie. They have some really great metallic markers. I have the bronze here, and I'm going to use this to color over each and every one of those little berries from the stamp. This is going to add that color, it adds that shine, and I can quickly just move on right to the next one because Sharpies dry so quickly. There's not going to be any smearing or anything like that. So this is my favorite way to add embellishments onto cards. I also love to use just regular colored Sharpies and kind of draw them like you would enamel dots. It's not going to add any dimension or anything, but on cards where you're trying to move quickly, it really is a great way to add little embellishments that you don't have to wait on to dry. There's a final look, and you can see that shine just from that little bit of Sharpie on the very bottom of the card. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and a few of my tips and tricks I like to use when creating card sets. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday. That is going to do it for me today. Don't forget all the information down in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching today, and happy crafting, everyone.